The Goodreads Choice Awards come around reliably every single year at about the same time, and every single year I tell myself maybe it's the year to stop. Maybe it's the year to walk away. I feel like we have a toxic relationship, the Goodreads Choice Awards and I, and yet every single year I find myself itching to do the same exact reading challenge, which is to try to read every single winner of the Goodreads Choice Awards and then share my thoughts with you, let you know if I thought they deserved their win, if I thought they had any value as a piece of literature at all, and collect little pockets of hate from people who are unhappy with my contrarian opinions. And this year is no different. So here we are again. I read all of the winners of the 2023 Goodreads Choice Awards with the exception of one book, which I will explain to you when we get there. Don't hate me. And I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and feelings and ratings with you in this video. So I ended up reading 16 books for this video. And honestly, the only way I was able to do this was by dressing in the most comfortable clothing humanly possible, and then nesting down with as many blankets and comfortable pillows and cats as possible, and just pushing through. And an integral part of nesting down to be as cozy as possible to get this video done was wearing comfortable underwear. You know what I'm talking about. You could be wearing the comfiest clothes you own. You could be basically wearing a giant fuzzy onesie. But if you're not wearing comfortable underwear, you're not going to be comfy. And that's where the sponsor of today's video comes in, Parade. Parade is my favorite place to get my underwear, my bras, my loungewear. Not only are their pieces so ridiculously comfortable, but they're really cute. They have unique patterns and colors and designs. They fit really nicely, and they're sustainably made. Another thing I really love about Parade is their sizing. Not only do they have kind of your standard size range that you'd expect, but they also have extended sizes for those of us with a little more up top. I am barely in that category, I'll admit, but even as a D cup, I really struggle to find bralettes and soft cup bras that actually hold everything while fitting around my ribs. And Parade has those extended sizes with a little more room in the cup. It's amazing. Parade is an amazing company that practices what it preaches. It's all about building community, inclusivity, making people feel good in their own skin, allowing people to express themselves with their underwear and their loungewear. Parade is also super focused on sustainability, which is so important to me personally. They have a plan to become the most sustainable underwear company in the world and to reach climate positivity by 2025, which is amazing to see. Parade is constantly launching limited edition and super fun collaborations, drops, fabrics, and patterns, and they can sell out fast, so I know I'm always checking the website as soon as a new collection drops. They just launched their collaboration with Betsy Johnson for Valentine's Day. Betsy Johnson has always been known for their iconic prints, and Parade is known for iconic prints. It's really just a match made in heaven. My favorite pieces from this collaboration are all of the vintage rosette pieces. The black fabric with the red rose pattern, so adorable and romantic and sweet. The bralette and the boxers are my two favorites. They are so ridiculously comfy, but I also feel really cute and kind of sexy when I wear them, which is amazing because y'all know boxers are the comfiest underwear on the planet, and I can't believe men gatekept them for so long. Because Parade is sponsoring this video, you can use my code BRIDE40 to get 40% off the website, not including the 80% off sale or the limited edition Betsy Johnson collection. But there are so many amazing products on the website that you definitely want to get for 40% off. So use my code BRIDE40 and the link in my description box to shop from Parade. Thanks again to Parade for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let's get into the categories. Just for a little refresher, because they did change the categories in 2023, the 15 categories were fiction, historical fiction, mystery and thriller, romance, romantasy, fantasy, science fiction, horror, young adult fantasy, young adult fiction, debut novel, nonfiction, memoir and autobiography, history and biography, and humor. And I do want to disclaim that I did not read the winner of the horror category, Holly by Stephen King. The reason is that I was doing a little bit of research because I had heard that this was a recurring character from other books of King's. And when I did said research, the consensus on the internet seemed to be that I would have to read 4 other books to have the context needed for this book. So no Stephen King for me in this video. I will direct you to the video I made a couple months back when the horror nominees were first posted, which I think turned out very fun and included a little buddy read with a fellow booktuber. So if you want to hear my thoughts on many of the nominees in the horror category, that video is for you, but I won't be talking about the winner in this video because reading 4 bonus books was just too much. So forgive me the hyperbole of the title. I did read 14 out of the 15 books plus 2 extra books to make this happen, and I feel like that's close enough, okay? I'm gonna start at the end of the list and work my way back to the beginning because I feel like the first 5, 6 categories are the ones that people are most interested in, and that way I'm saving the best for last. I feel like it's very anticlimactic to end on 4 nonfiction categories, so we're not gonna do that. We're gonna start there instead. So starting with humor, and the winner in the humor category was Being Henry, The Fawns and Beyond by Henry Winkler. I feel like I need to put 2 caveats out there before I talk about this book. The first one is that I never read books in the humor category of my own free will. So there is a bit of a bias there. And the second is that I had no idea who Henry Winkler was until I started reading this book. And even once I started reading, I was unsure. I ended up having to Google the Fawns clips on YouTube so I could get an idea of his most famous role because I had 0 context for who this man was.
I hate to say it. I hope I don't sound ridiculous. I don't know who this man is. I mean, he could be walking down the street. I wouldn't know a thing. Sorry to this man.
So I am not the target audience for this book 2 times over, maybe even more times over, but I'm gonna stop there. So that's my caveat, okay? That being said, I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I actually really enjoyed it, which is kind of wild when you think about reading an autobiography about a person that you know nothing about and have no desire to know anything about. Like I said, I didn't know who Henry Winkler was. I've never seen him in anything as far as I know. So I went into this thinking that I was just gonna have to get through it. It was gonna be, you know, your typical memoir, autobiography, not really resonate with me or be all that interesting. But like I said, pleasantly surprised. I found Henry Winkler very charming. He narrates the audiobook and he did a great job. He seems very personable. He seems generally like a nice guy. The fact that he's been with his wife for over 40 years is always, you know, a little sweet check in the green flag category. He seems very reflective about his career as an actor and also very sort of self-aware in terms of where he went wrong as a young actor, getting kind of caught up in his own hype, in his own fame. And it seems like he's really thought about it and grown as a person, which is always nice. I didn't find it deeply moving or anything, but I did find it interesting. I thought he did a pretty good job of sharing a lot of insights about his life without necessarily overemphasizing the importance of his own struggles, if that makes sense. And my favorite part was when he was talking about being in theater school, because I went to theater school and it was very relatable to hear him talking about the experience of being at theater school, being asked to do exercises that are just completely baffling and really embarrassing. And you try to commit 100% and then you're told by a teacher that you're making a mockery of the exercise and clearly don't care at all when you're genuinely trying, but like, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing because the things they're asking you to do are so ridiculous. Theater school is a trip and a half, I'll just say that. But I loved those sections. He got to learn from some really iconic figures within the theater world, including Stella Adler, which was just so amazing to read about. I was kicking my feet listening to those parts like the gleeful theater nerd that I am. But yeah, it was fun. It was cute. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I'm not sure how much I will think back on this in the future. I don't know that I necessarily learned anything or took anything away from it that will impact my life, but I don't regret listening to the audiobook. I had a good time, and I recommended it to my dad because he did watch Happy Days and knows who the Fonz is, and I feel like he would enjoy it. So that was Being Henry. I think it was a really solid autobiography, and I gave it 3 stars. Did Being Henry deserve to win in this category? Sure. Why not? I have not read any of the other books in this category, and I won't. I just won't. Good job, Henry. You're great at being yourself and at writing books about yourself. Moving on to the history and biography category, this is another category that I'm not necessarily the target audience for. I don't read a lot of history. Not that I necessarily have anything against it, and I've certainly read nonfiction history books in the past that I enjoyed and got a lot out of, but it's not really a genre that I'm particularly drawn to. I prefer to learn about history through other mediums, like a documentary or something. But alas, the winner in the history and biography category was The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder, very dramatic, by David Grann. And you know what? I'm not super into military history in general. I feel like my experience going through public school in Canada involved a very heavy emphasis on military history, and it's just not something that I'm particularly drawn to or find all that fascinating. But I did relatively recently, and by recently I mean within the last couple years, read a book about a famous shipwreck that I absolutely adored, and that was Endurance. This is nonfiction based on the journals of the crew, the seamen who were aboard Endurance when it went down in Antarctica. This is such a good book. It's so engaging. It is really well paced. You really get invested. It's high stakes. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Having had that experience, going into yet another shipwreck nonfiction, I was excited. I thought maybe this will be another Endurance and I'll be totally drawn in. I'll be so invested. I'll be so worried about the fates of the various characters. And sadly, that was not what happened. This book was fine. I don't want to put out the impression that it was terrible. It wasn't. It was just kind of boring, to be honest. And again, I'm probably not the target audience for a book like this, but I'm also not the target audience for a book like this. And I loved it. So it can be done. But this one, as much as it was about a shipwreck, about mutinies and factions fighting and murder and so many dramatic elements all in one, sickness, and it was based on firsthand accounts, all of these journals from the various officers and seamen, it just wasn't that engaging for me. I didn't feel like the characters were developed enough, the people involved were not developed enough for me to be invested in them and their story, in their journey, to hope that they didn't die. I really didn't care. And it's very easy to make me care about even fictional characters, let alone real people who existed. It was a lot more telling than showing. My favorite parts were definitely the quotes that were included from various people at the time, whether they were people who were on the wager or just contemporaries, and some of the, exploration of etymology of some of the words and phrases we still use today that came from officers and seamen in this time period. I found that really interesting, but that was definitely not the majority of the book. And the majority of it really just felt like someone going through from A to B to C to D of what happened to them, which maybe would be enough if you were really invested in this particular story or you just really cared about this time period in history or ships. I don't know. But for me, it was just a bit dry and I didn't really care that much. I will say the narrator did a great job. I saw some reviews where people were complaining about the narrator and I have no idea what they're talking about. The narrator had a buttery, amazing voice and I loved listening to it. And the book was fine, but it didn't really blow me away. It certainly did not come close to taking the crown that Endurance has held since I read it as the best nonfiction book about a shipwreck I've ever read. To be fair, I've only read 2 nonfiction books about shipwrecks, but it's still the best one. The Wager was fine. Did it deserve to win? I don't know. I haven't read any of the other books in this category, and I likely won't because, to be honest, most of them sound super boring. Again, not the target audience. So I give The Wager 3 stars. It was fine, and that's about it. Moving on to the next category, which was Memoir and Autobiography. And the winner was the much anticipated The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I feel like the internet kind of broke when this book was announced. I think a lot of people were very excited to read about Britney's experiences from Britney herself without being filtered through her family or lawyers or editors of a magazine. I know I certainly was. For some context, I'm a 1992 baby. I grew up with Britney Spears. I had her first album on a cassette tape, which really shows my age, but I used to put her debut album cassette in my little boombox and listen to the whole first half singing and dancing, eject, flip it around, pop it back in, close it, satisfying click, start the second half, dance and sing my little butt off, and repeat ad nauseum. I was obsessed with Britney Spears. She was everything I wanted to be as a little girl. She got to dance and sing for a living. She was this stunningly beautiful, blonde, gorgeous, super talented, super charismatic, lovely seeming person who was having all of her dreams come true. And, like a lot of people, I think. It's been hard over the last several decades watching what's happened to her life and what she's been through. It's felt more personal to a lot of us from my specific generation, I think, than other celebrities, because we really watched her grow up and we watched her go through so much. She was treated so terribly by the media from the start of her career, and it only got worse. And I was really looking forward to hearing her experiences and hopefully getting a little bit of an insight into what her life has been like for her and what the conservatorship was like and how she's healing now that she's free. And please don't hate me, but I didn't like this. I did not think this was well done. This is not a very well-written memoir. It's very conversational, but it gets rambly and repetitive. It feels like it was not edited at all. And to my knowledge, it was ghost written, and the ghostwriter has been public about their involvement, which is wild to me because I don't know why they would want to put their name on this. I realize it's associated with a huge star, but this was not a well-written memoir. So that's part one. I'm sorry. I know so many people love this, and I really wanted to love it, but I just can't lie and say it was well written, because it really wasn't. And on top of that, I feel like there wasn't nearly as much depth and insight as I was looking for. Not surprisingly, considering it's been a very short period of time since Britney has had her freedom back. I don't think she's had enough time to process everything that she's been through, again, understandably, but there really wasn't a lot of thoughtful insight and reflection and vulnerability when looking at her life sort of post shaving her head moment. Not that we are owed that vulnerability, but you kind of expect a little bit of opening up and vulnerability when someone writes a memoir about their life. And I just didn't feel that we really got that. It was a lot more insightful prior to that time in her life, especially her childhood. For me, the start of the memoir was the shining beacon. It was the best part for me. Her insight into why she got into performing in the first place, why she was drawn to being the center of attention, to singing and dancing, was really raw and vulnerable. Again, super insightful, very self-aware. I could relate to a lot of it as a little kid who definitely spent a lot of time alone and was drawn to being a bit loud and gregarious and singing and dancing as a way to have people look at me and pay attention to me and give me the love that I was craving. But as the memoir goes on, as she travels through the years of her life, we get less and less insight, and it starts to feel a little bit like she's stuck in an echo chamber with the people around her, which on the one hand, I'm really glad she's finally surrounded by people who love and support her and are probably telling her, you go girl, yes, do what you want to do, you're doing amazing, we love you, keep doing your thing. I'm so glad she has that, but I do think this memoir needed more time to percolate, more time in therapy, more time healing, more time processing to really come back and have something really meaningful and insightful to say, and also to be a little bit more self-aware. I really feel like self-awareness was lacking from the second half of this memoir. Again, I'm not trying to attack Britney Spears. I love her, but I do think some things were glossed over. Some of the way that certain aspects of her life were handled were a bit jarring to me. I think I'm going to stop there. I don't want to piss off the entire world. Please do not hate me, but I just did not enjoy reading this memoir. I found it a bit unsettling. I don't think she was ready to write this, and I don't think it was well written as a book. So that's where I'm at with The Woman in Me. I give it 2 stars. Those 2 stars come from the beginning. The portion about her childhood, I think, was great, and I wish the whole book had been that way, but unfortunately it wasn't. It went downhill from there, and I think it's worth reading, especially if you are a fan of Britney Spears, if you grew up in a similar time that I did, where she was just such a huge cultural icon. But I would be interested in getting another memoir from Britney in another 10 years, when she's had that time to really process everything. I think it would have a lot more to say, and I think it would be really worthwhile to do. So I hope she does write another memoir with a different ghostwriter, or at least an editor, and with some more time to let all of that, process. So please don't hate me. I'm so scared. I have not read the other books in this category, but I can't say that I can see a way that this deserves to be the winning memoir, considering how poorly written and edited it was. Moving on to the next category, which is nonfiction. And the winner of this category is another one that I would not have read if not for this video. It was Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. And not because of the topic of the book. I would certainly read a nonfiction book about poverty, but the fact that it was specifically poverty in America, because I'm not American. I do read a lot of books by American authors. I read and consume a lot of content talking about systemic issues in the US. So I feel like I know enough about them as someone who is not American and never plans on being American. So this definitely wouldn't be something that I would have been drawn to. Certainly not an expert by any means, but I've read a lot about poverty. I understand a lot of the structural issues that lead to poverty. I have read a lot about poverty in my own country. So I probably wouldn't have chosen to read this otherwise, but honestly, I'm glad I did, because this was fantastic. And yes, it is specifically about the US, and there are parts of this book that did not apply to my country, even though there are quite a few similarities between the US and Canada. We're not the same. And some of those structural things that impact poverty, like housing, the prison industrial complex, and access to healthcare, are very different in the US and Canada, despite our geographic proximity. Definitely things that did not apply, but a lot of it was not as specific as I'd expected it to. There was a lot of just talking about those really large systems from a very zoomed out view, which I appreciated. And as much as I know about a lot of these things already, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was well done. It went into enough detail, I think, without getting too bogged down in the nitty-gritty. It was specific enough without being totally alienating to people who are not American, I think. The book was just the right length, in my opinion. Very informative, easy to listen to, interesting. I feel like it did a great job of what it was trying to do. So I give it 5 stars, which I'm very shocked by. I especially loved the section that was talking about sectoral bargaining. That was something that I hadn't really thought about all that much, and I really appreciated hearing the author's thoughts on how sectoral bargaining could really improve conditions for all workers without having to have specific unions for every single company or every single specific store to be able to have this collective bargaining, which could really improve working conditions and compensation for everyone. So I really liked it. I thought it was great. 5 stars. Probably not for everyone, but if you're interested in reading about the systemic causes of poverty, the things that make people poor and keep them poor, that looks at it with a very intersectional lens, I think you'll appreciate this book. Again, with the caveat that it is about the US, so take that as you will. And while I haven't read the other nominees in this category, I can happily say that I think this book is deserving of winning because it's a really great book. Super well done. With that, we are done with the nonfiction winners, moving into our first fiction category, which is debut novel. And the winner of the debut novel category was also the winner in historical fiction. So we got a double dipper here. It must be very exciting for a debut author to win not only the debut novel category, but a second category as well. Must be great. Anyways, the winner was Wayward by Amelia Hart. And this is categorized as historical fiction, but it does have magic in it. It does take place in historical time periods, but the magic element is pretty prominent. So I am a bit surprised it was nominated in the historical fiction category rather than fantasy, although I imagine it wouldn't have had much of a chance in the fantasy category. But alas, there are a lot of trigger warnings for this book. As always, I will be listing them on the book card when my review is finished, but just be aware there's a lot of potentially triggering content in this book. And, you know, on the one hand, I liked it. Glowing review. There were things about it I liked. I liked the characters. I thought the atmosphere was well done. I felt pretty engaged from the start. I liked a lot of the dynamics between different characters. I liked the different time periods. Each one was interesting, and I thought the pacing between them was really well balanced. I think the themes would have had more weight if this book had not had magic. So much of this book was really focused on that resilience that women have developed over the course of history, living in a patriarchal society. Women have had to be very resilient, very strong, very independent and self-sufficient. And this book was definitely narrowing in on that as a theme, the internal strength of women, which is great. Love that. But I felt like that theme was kind of cheapened by the fact that the women in the novel were actually powerful witches, because several moments that were supposed to be really impactful emotionally were hinging around acts of magic And so instead of feeling like this book was really celebrating the internal strength of women, it felt like it was saying women who have magical powers are powerful, which is great, I guess, but it didn't feel like that's what the novel was trying to say, but it did feel like the fact that the women were able to use magic to solve the problems that they faced made it feel less like a book celebrating women and more like a book celebrating how cool magic would be, which, yes, but maybe not as thematically consistent as the author wanted. I'm trying not to be too harsh because, again, this is a debut novel, but that choice did feel odd to me. I would compare it to something like Hester, which also kind of jumps between different time periods and very much has a strong focus on that internal strength of women. Also talks about periods of history where strong, independent women were categorized as witches and killed for it without anyone actually having magic powers. And I think that made it more impactful for me personally than this book. I will also say that it felt like the book kept coming back to this idea of the inherent internal strength of women being tied to our ability to be mothers and our wombs, which felt not very inclusive. And I found it a bit off-putting. And I'm saying that as a woman who I have a uterus that is presumably working, although I haven't tested it and don't plan to anytime soon or possibly ever. I am currently child-free. My current plan is to continue to be child-free. And while I think motherhood is super cool and amazing, and I love it for people who are not me, I do find it a bit off-putting. I can't think of a better word. I find it off-putting when the message is pushed that women are strong because we're capable of giving birth. Again, not very inclusive for all the women, of which there are many, who are not capable of giving birth for a variety of reasons, and also all the women, of which there are many, who are not interested in giving birth, even if they were able. I don't know. I don't love that. I think it's fair to write a book that is about motherhood specifically, but I didn't get the impression that this book was supposed to be about motherhood specifically, and it really felt like it was reducing women's strength to our wombs, which, you know what? I just found a better word. It's off-putting, but it also feels a bit objectifying and dehumanizing. So I didn't love that. It made me a bit uncomfy. I feel like I can't say uncomfy now without thinking about Love is Blind and Chelsea.
You made me feel uncomfy.
So as much as I enjoyed this book, I liked the characters, I liked the setting, I thought it was atmospheric. I wasn't super on board with the implication that women are strong because we have functioning uteruses. I don't know. It was a bit weird. So anyway, Wayward, I think it was trying to do something interesting. I think it did well in some aspects, but it just didn't really work for me or come together in the way I'd hoped. And for me, it was kind of middle of the road at the end of the day. So I'd probably give it around 3 stars. I'm a bit on the fence with my rating on this one, but right now, 3 stars makes sense. In terms of whether it deserved to win as debut novel, I can't say that I think it did. I've read 3 of the other nominees, September House, Mostrillo, and The Collected Regrets of Clover. Both The Collected Regrets of Clover and Mostrillo were 5-star books for me. September House was a 3-star. And while I really liked The Collected Regrets of Clover, and it made me cry like a little baby when I finished it, Mostrillo was literally my favorite book of 2023. It was the best book I read all year. It's literary horror. It's heartbreaking. It's gorgeous. Ugh. It's amazing. It's so good. I've talked about it so much already, so I'll try to not go on and on about it. If you want to hear me gush a lot, check out, well, several videos. The horror nominees vlog, I gushed about it, but also my book bracket video, and I have a review on Goodreads, but it would definitely have been my pick for the debut novel category, and it did get my vote through every round, and I'm really sad it didn't win. It also deserved to win in the horror category, in my opinion. And it didn't win there either, which is also a travesty. Okay, moving on to the next category, which is young adult fiction. And the winner in this category was Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Again, I feel like I have to do a bit of a disclaimer. I had decided prior to the winners being announced that I wasn't going to read any more Ali Hazelwood books. I've read 2, and both of them have been 2 stars or under. And both of them have had the same trope that I hate with a burning passion, which is the trope of the female main character being so teeny tiny. She's so small. It's ridiculous how tiny she is. You could lift her up with a single finger. She's like an ant. And the male love interest being either ridiculously, cartoonishly huge, or at the very least, very, very, very tall, like way taller than average, and also much more muscular than they have any right to be considering their profession. and what they spend their whole life doing. And this book did that yet again. I'm not going to get super into it because honestly, I already have ranted enough about this trope. I'll link the video where I read the first Ali Hazelwood I'd ever come across, The Love Hypothesis, if you want to see my initial reaction to her take on this trope and that initial rant. It was a doozy. But unfortunately, this book does that again, which... Again, I don't love it. I really hate this trope. I'm going to try not to get into it again. I think it's a harmful trope. It is very overdone, and I do not like it. So, getting that out of the way to start. It's also extremely ridiculous to me that this is a young adult novel where the male love interest is 20 years old and he's a professional chess player who was a child prodigy and has spent basically all of his free time for his entire life playing chess, and he's super built and muscular. I feel like this was the perfect opportunity for Ali Hazelwood to prove all of us wrong and write a male love interest who just has a slightly more average body. He could still be, you know, kind of muscular, kind of tall, I guess, but he could have also just been like a regular height, skinny dude. And that's cool too. That's great. We need more diversity in our love interests, okay? And this was such a great opportunity and it was just thrown away for no reason, and I don't like it. But with that being said, I did actually like this book more than I expected to. There are things about it that I didn't love. Ali Hazelwood is definitely on the train of the not like other girls, overly quirky, smartest of all the girls, coolest of all the girls main characters. And this main character was no different. I did find her very grating for much of the book. She did grow on me in the middle, but then got much worse at the end again. It was a bit of a roller coaster. But I did really like the premise of the book. I loved getting a peek into the professional chess world. I have no idea how accurate it was. All I know about professional chess, I learned from Queen's Gambit on Netflix. So not sure how accurate that is, but the world of chess, tackling misogyny in professional chess, I thought that was well done. I thought it was really interesting. I was engaged. I did think it felt a little bit like Chosen One overpowered MC at times with how quickly she was able to beat people who were the best in the world at chess and actively practicing when she took a long time off. I think it should have been harder for her to compete. Personally, I still liked it. I thought it was interesting. I thought the main character's dynamic with the love interest was quite charming and sweet. I didn't love how Ali Hazelwood represented bisexual people. The main character is bisexual, and she's described as someone who has a lot of casual sex with no emotional attachment and doesn't really understand the appeal of emotional attachments. And there are reasons for that in her background, which we learn, but it is a harmful stereotype about bisexual people that they are promiscuous and have many sexual partners, do not necessarily make good long-term monogamous partners. So I didn't love that. I don't think that that was necessarily intentional, but I did find it a little off-putting. I also didn't like that there is a character in this book who is a virgin at 20, and that is treated as a really weird thing. The main character thinks it is super strange and kind of makes fun of this character for being a virgin at 20 and is just in total shock that they could possibly be a virgin. And I didn't love that either, because I don't think shaming people because they're a virgin is ever cool or okay. I don't think setting a date by which time you must have lost your virginity to be normal is cool or okay. I think a lot of people are virgins into their 20s and beyond, and that's totally normal and okay. So I didn't love that aspect either. But with all that being said, I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. I found it more engaging than I thought I would. I got through it pretty quickly. I felt that some of the issues with the main character's family dynamics were not really as well handled as I would like. There's a lot of parentification of the main character, and it just has a band-aid put over it at the end and everything's totally fine. And there's really no acknowledgement of how much harm was done to her because of the sheer amount of parentification and the sheer amount of responsibility that was put on her shoulders at a very young age. The book was enjoyable. Certainly not perfect, but I liked it better than I thought I would. And it might not be saying much, but this is my favorite Ali Hazelwood I've ever read. I gave it 3 stars. It was good. Wasn't great, but it was good. So there you go. I've only read 2 of the other young adult fiction nominees, Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute, which is a romance, and The Davenports, which is a historical fiction romance. The Davenports I had mixed feelings on. I gave it 3 stars in the end. I have a review on Goodreads if you want to see that. And Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute wasn't a perfect book for me, but I did give it 4 stars and I did like it quite a bit. And personally, I liked it better than I liked Check and Mate. So it got my vote when I was actually voting for the winner, and I personally think that it was more deserving of the win than Check and Mate, even though Check and Mate was fine. It was good. I don't hate it or anything. But that's just my personal opinion, which is what this whole video is. Our next category is the second and final young adult category, which is young adult fantasy. And the winner in this category was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a book that I feel like I was seeing a lot of hype for on the internet. And when I learned it was young adult fantasy, I kind of took a step back. I've been trying to reduce the amount of young adult fantasy I read because I tend to not enjoy a lot of the aspects that come along with YA fantasy at this current time in publishing. And, you know, contrary to popular belief, I do actually try to spend my time reading books that I think I'll like. And I tend to enjoy adult fantasy more than I enjoy young adult fantasy at this time in my life. This is one that I had put on my TBR, but then kind of took a step back when I learned it was young adult. But when I saw it won the young adult fantasy category and I read the description, I was actually pretty intrigued. And honestly, I really liked this book. With the exception of an ending that was really abrupt and felt very much like a really sudden cliffhanger to get you hooked so you'll read the second book, which is something that I hate with a burning passion, such a pet peeve of mine. With the exception of that, I thought this book was really, really well done. I thought it was beautifully written. I loved the world building and the magic system. Loved the idea of the magical typewriters and how they worked. Really enjoyed the character development. The 2 most prominent characters were really well developed, in my opinion. Were really complex characters on their own, but then also had a very complex and compelling dynamic as a pair. I really liked this structure of young people trying to get into the world of journalism and trying to improve their writing skill, trying to compete for a spot as a columnist at this paper. I liked some of the other fantastical elements, this war of gods that was taking place. I loved a lot of the peripheral characters as well. It was just really well done. I loved the experience of reading this book. I was really engaged, really invested. And again, it was really just the ending that kind of threw me for a loop. It was so abrupt and not super satisfying as a standalone. I realize there will be more books in the series and I will read them. Well, I'll read the second one for sure, but I personally feel like even in a series, each book should be able to stand on its own to a certain extent and have a satisfying conclusion. And I really wish this book had done that because it just felt too rushed, too sudden. How many different ways can I say the same thing? You get it. Didn't love the ending. So for me, even though I really, really liked this, I really liked it, I would give it 4 stars. With a better ending, it would have had 5 stars for sure, but I think this is a really solid book. While I haven't read the other nominees, I definitely think this book deserved to win. It was just so well put together. Our next category is horror, and like I mentioned, I did not read the winner in this category, Holly by Stephen King, because I would have had to read 4 other books to have context for it. But like I mentioned, I do have a whole video reading many of the horror nominees, so I will link that down below if you want to hear my thoughts on a bunch of the books that were nominated in this category. And like I already mentioned when we were in the debut novel category, my pick would be Mostrillo by Gerardo Samano Cordova. Chef's Kiss, just a masterpiece. My favorite book of 2023. Certainly the best horror I read all year, and I read some really good horror in 2023. Even if you're not necessarily a horror fan, but you're willing to read literary horror, I would recommend Mostrillo because it blew me away. Moving on to the science fiction category, I personally am a big fan of sci-fi. I like to read sci-fi quite a bit, although I feel like I haven't been reading as much sci-fi recently, which kind of makes me sad. I feel like I need to fix that. But I'm a sci-fi nerd. I'm a big Trekkie. My cats are named after characters in Star Wars. I like science fiction, okay? I wasn't super excited to read the winner in this category, which was In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. I read the description of this book when it was announced, and to be honest, it did less than nothing for me. It just did not sound interesting. I was not intrigued by the premise whatsoever. TJ Klune is a whole other subject. There's a lot of controversy about TJ Klune. I'm not going to touch on that in this video because it's a lot, but you can definitely look that up if you are unaware. But I just wasn't super interested. But again, it was a winner, so I decided to read it. And you know, it was fine. I don't really have strong feelings about this book one way or the other. It just don't really feel like it did very much. I think the message was meant to be sort of prioritizing your found family, keeping them close. It was sort of a cozy read in that way. But it didn't really do anything for me. I wasn't super invested. I didn't really care about the characters. I found most of the side characters incredibly aggravating, very annoying from the very start. And some of them grew on me a little bit, but continued to be annoying. And others just never stopped being super annoying for the entire book. Did kind of feel like reading a children's book aimed at kids 10 and below with random sexual innuendos a couple times a chapter, which was weird. It was a really weird tone for a book. I don't know. I'm not really sure what this book is trying to say, and I'm not sure that I care one way or the other, which sounds a bit harsh. It's how I feel. So that's In the Lives of Puppets. Right now I'm sitting at 3 stars because honestly, I don't feel strongly about it in either direction. Down the middle of the road. It exists and it's fine, I guess. I liked the world building. I thought the world was interesting, but otherwise it just didn't really do anything for me. So yeah, that's In the Lives of Puppets. I haven't been reading that much sci-fi recently, so looking at the list of nominees here, I don't think I've read any of the other nominees, but a couple of them are on my TBR. And I would hope at least one of the other ones on this list would capture me more than In the Lives of Puppets. I feel like something else in there probably was more worthy of the win. Let me know if you've read more of the nominees, who you would pick. And honestly, in general, let me know down below which books you would have picked for each category or which ones you voted for if you voted. I'm really curious to know which books you would back. That would also help me build my TBR because there are definitely lots of books on the nominee lists that I'm curious about, but I definitely did not have enough bandwidth to read all of those in addition to all the winners for this video. No amount of comfy underwear could have made that happen, no matter how great it is. And parade underwear is really great. Okay, moving on to the next category, which is fantasy. This is adult fantasy. And the winner was Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. And this is a sequel. So I did read 2 books for this category. Ninth House is the first, and then Hellbent. I avoided Ninth House when it first came out, and ever since. I had no plans to read it. I had read one other book by Leigh Bardugo. I read Six of Crows, which was fine. I had no strong feelings about really. But then when I heard about Ninth House and I heard just a snippet of the content warnings, it sounded really excessively graphic and disgusting. So that, in addition to an interview I read with the author where she was vehemently against the use of trigger and content warnings for books, which I don't love because I'm a big advocate for content warnings. I think they are the kind and responsible thing to do, and it is very easy for an author to just write down potential content warnings and slap it on one of the first pages of a book that most people skip by anyway, and the people who care can get that information instead of having to search high and low through reviews to hopefully get mention of content warnings while risking getting spoiled for large plot points or twists. So anyway, I was never planning on reading this series, but again, it was the winner. So I thought, you know what? Let's go for it. At least I know the content warnings ahead of time, which if Leigh Bardugo had her way, I would not. So thanks for that. But I did seek them out ahead of time, so at least I was aware going into it. And I'm glad I was aware because the content is dark, it's graphic, there's a lot in this book. And I will definitely say that I don't think all of it needed to be as graphic as it was. In my personal opinion, some of the content felt like it was there for shock value and not much else, and I don't appreciate that in the books I read. I don't mind books having graphic content if it feels like there's a reason for it to be there. Some of this content I don't think needed to be there, and some of it that maybe was more foundational to some of the character development, for example, did not have to be as graphic as it was, in my personal opinion. That being said, I did actually like Ninth House a lot more than I expected to. I gave it 4 stars. I really liked the world building. I liked the setting, being at Yale, but with a dash of magic. I liked the themes of people being collateral damage for those with power and privilege. I thought the magical, supernatural elements were interesting. I thought the main character was interesting herself. She was a pretty complex character. She had a very well-developed backstory. I generally enjoyed being in her head, and I thought the plot was good and engaging. I was interested from the beginning and I never fell off. I was interested the whole way through. I'm glad I read it, but again, I do think this book is a book that should have trigger and content warnings attached to it. I will share the ones that I noticed while reading, and I am disappointed that the author is so vehemently against them, but I'll try not to get sidetracked. So that was Ninth House, which I read so that I had context for the sequel, which won this category. So talking about Hellbent, which was the actual winner, this had a little bit of the curse of the sequels, as I would put it, which is that a sequel doesn't really live up to the greatness of the original, especially book 2 in a trilogy or a longer series. I feel like book 2 is often a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive, kind of a transition book between the books where things actually happen. And the weird thing about this sequel is that things did actually happen. There were actually a lot of things happening, a lot of events, a lot of mysteries, things that should have been exciting and engaging, but for whatever reason, the pacing and the structure really drained this book of any tension and stakes that it could have had. I don't want to spoil it, so I won't say what the sort of biggest intense event of this book was, but it should have been a way bigger deal than it was, and it felt really anticlimactic the way that it was handled. There was a lot of repetition in this book, not only of things that happened in the first book that we already knew about, but there were moments in the main character and in other characters' pasts that we went back to revisit over and over and over and over and over again in the second book. And it got really tiresome. After, the 6th time of addressing the same thing, I'm ready to move on, I also found the way that Darlington was handled in this book was really strange. There was also the introduction of a whole new branch of supernatural creatures in this book that felt superfluous, I'll say, and kind of at odds with the way the supernatural elements and the magic system had been built up in the first book. It didn't feel like this specific kind of supernatural creature fit into the world that had been established, at least for me. It kind of threw me off. Yeah, just a major lacking in urgency and stakes, and very, very repetitive. So for me personally, I didn't enjoy Hellbent as much as Ninth House. I would give it 3 stars. I'm definitely still glad I read it, but I really don't think it reached its potential. I feel like there must be a 3rd book planned, considering how this book finished. Yeah, just curse of the second book, I guess. It didn't really do it for me. Several of the other nominees are on my TBR. Some of them I'm planning on starting very soon, like in the next couple weeks. Okay, moving on to the next category, which is a new one for 2023, Romantasy. Did we need a Romantasy category? I'm very conflicted. On the one hand, I'm glad that all the Romantasy books are separate from the fantasy category, so other fantasy books have the chance to win, but I'm not a personal fan of Romantasy, so the fact that it gets its own category is kind of baffling to me, especially because we already have romance, we already have fantasy, we even have young adult fantasy and sci-fi, which is usually completely taken over by young adult fantasy. It just feels a little excessive. Okay, let me know in the comments your thoughts on whether there should be a separate Romantasy category or not. But anyway, the winner of the first ever Romantasy category was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I read Fourth Wing. I have an entire video that is, I believe, approaching an hour long, if not longer than an hour, of me reading it, reacting to it extensively, both spoilers and non-spoilers clearly marked. So I'm going to try to be very brief, and you can go check out that video if you want all my thoughts on Fourth Wing. I'll link it in the description box. But I personally did not love Fourth Wing. There were things about it I liked, mainly the dragons, but I found it a bit predictable. I didn't love the main character. I didn't love the way the romantic relationships were handled. I thought the writing was pretty poor, in my personal opinion. It was just not the greatest thing I've ever read, and it was very overhyped, which made it worse. It also read very YA to me. Honestly, thinking about it, in my mind, Fourth Wing felt a lot more like YA fantasy than Divine Rivals, which is actually young adult fantasy. Just not my cup of tea, and I gave it 2 stars. So I think it's pretty clear to say that I'm not a big fan of Fourth Wing, and I don't know that it deserved to win. Though, who knows, because I have not read any of the other Romantasy nominees, nor do I have any plan to read any of them ever. So maybe it's the best of the bunch. I couldn't say. Let me know in the comments if you have read more of them and you have thoughts and feelings. Moving on to the next category, which is romance, and the winner in the romance category was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I have had a whole journey with Emily Henry at this point. I read People We Meet on Vacation and despised it. I gave it 1 star. I thought it was terrible. Then I gave her another chance with Book Lovers, and I actually really liked that book. Not a perfect book, but I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was cute. I liked the characters. It was sweet. It did what I felt like a romance should do. Going into Happy Place, I didn't know what to expect. I was really hoping to get more of a book lovers type book than a People We Meet on Vacation type book, but sadly, it was the reverse. I did not like this book at all. I started it last year and I DNF'd it about 50% of the way through because I just could not take it anymore. And when I saw it won, I had to really hype myself up to read it. And I really wanted to quit at that same point again, but I pushed through to get to the end, and I wish I could say it was worth pushing through, but it really was not worth it. I did not like this book at all. 1 star from me. The characters are all so annoying. It's ridiculous how irritating these characters are, and they're all the same character. There is no distinction between these characters. It could have all been in the main character's head, and that would have made total sense to me because they all talked in the exact same heavily millennial, quirky way. And I say that as a millennial who is quite quirky. I couldn't take it. I did not like the romance. The male love interest was very off-putting to me. Their dynamic was weird. They were together for a really long time, but their communication skills were in the negatives. They could not talk to each other or express their feelings or have any kind of an adult relationship. The friendships were weird. It seemed like they all hated each other and none of them were open with each other about what they needed out of a friendship. There was a lot of immaturity, a lot of miscommunication, which is one of my least favorite tropes in contemporary romance. And the setting was not at all engaging. It was meant to be everyone's happy place, this amazing, beach house where they feel at home and this is their found family and it's so significant to them. I really didn't feel like Emily Henry painted the scene at all. I could not envision where they were. It didn't feel like the happy place was its own character in the novel, which I felt this was a great opportunity to do that. And I love when books make the setting its own sort of character. Didn't get any of that. All of the parts that were meant to be cute and romantic I found really off-putting. A lot of the things that the male love interest said were actively repulsive to me. And then there's a whole extended scene in the middle where they eat weed gummies and get really, really high from a single gummy each and act like immature, very annoying teenagers for way too long. And that's where I DNF'd the first time, and it was painful reading it again. Just terrible. It was terrible. I hated this book so much. I'm sorry if you liked it. People have different tastes. Some people hate book lovers and love People We Meet on Vacation. It happens. I'm not judging you as a person if you liked this book. I just really hated it. It was not for me whatsoever. And I wish I could get the amount of time I spent reading half this book and then reading that half again and reading to the end back, but I never will. So that's Happy Place. I'm not sure if I am willing to give Emily Henry another chance at this point. Maybe Book Lovers was just a fluke. I don't know, but this book was terrible. I hated it so much. I've not read any of the other nominees, and I'm not sure that I will. I'm not a huge contemporary romance fan. I do occasionally read them, and there are some that I really love, but I would say the majority of what's coming out as contemporary romance and the stuff that gets really, really popular is not generally my cup of tea. So I'm not particularly planning on reading any of the other nominees, but I'm sure that at least one of them is at least slightly better than Happy Place. So there you go. People are going to hate me. Moving on to the next category, which was mystery and thriller. And the winner was The Housemaid's Secret by Frida McFadden. This was another sequel. So I read The Housemaid and then I read The Housemaid's Secret. So I will review both, but I'll try to be concise, which I'm very bad at doing, but I'll try. What can I say about this? The Housemaid and The Housemaid's Secret are both a very run-of-the-mill sort of paint-by-numbers thriller, popcorn thrillers, as I like to say. They're the junk food of the thriller genre. They're quickly written, they're really pumped out, they're easy to read, they have a couple twists, there's usually something shocking, and you can read them in a night, be mildly entertained, and move on with your life. That's what these books are. That being said, there were aspects of them that I felt were more problematic or questionable than your average popcorn thriller, which for me made them less than just an average 3-star. So starting with The Housemaid, I give it 2 stars. This book is really just terrible people being terrible to each other for the entire book, but the thing that really stood out to me is it's very poorly written. I cannot imagine that this book was edited even once by even one person. I'm not even sure the author reread it one time after she wrote it. So many mistakes, so many obscure sayings and phrases that I've never heard before that were repeated multiple times in a single chapter or throughout the book in a very glaring way. The writing was quite clunky, and there is a lot of misogyny in this book and fat phobia, which at first I thought was a characterization choice. The main character was deeply misogynistic and fat phobic, and it just was never challenged by the book, which, I'm not necessarily going to immediately assume that the author herself is misogynistic and fat phobic. Maybe it was just a choice to have a flawed character, but I do prefer when books, at least at some point, clearly have those opinions challenged by another character, for example. So I didn't love reading from the perspective of a character who not only made what I would consider to be unethical choices, but also was fatphobic and misogynistic the whole time. But also the characterization in general in the book was really spotty. It was really inconsistent. Our main character is freshly out of prison for a decade, but has 0 survival instinct until all of a sudden she has all the survival instinct. It could have used several rounds of editing. That's what I'll say. Okay, so 2 stars for me. Also didn't like the narrative that the main character was more desirable than another character because she was younger and had a working uterus and could be someone who could provide biological offspring. That was a bit weird. Anyway, I'm trying not to get caught up in the weeds. That was not even the winner. It was the book I had to read the winner. So that was The Housemaid. Relatively entertaining at times, but definitely inconsistent, poorly written, and had some weird content that I wasn't super on board with. Then we get to the sequel, The Housemaid's Secret, which was the winner in this category, and things just went more downhill. It was more nonsensical than the first. Things kind of went off the rails a little bit with believability. There was a very unique structure to the first book that I actually quite enjoyed, but the author just totally reproduced that very unique structure in the second book, which made it feel quite lazy, like a paint by numbers thing. Kind of made me think of books I read as a kid, like Babysitter's Club, which had 14,000 books in a series and every book was structured exactly the same. That's what this felt like, which is fine, I guess. It was just very predictable. The reveals were in a very similar vein to the original. And this book also had a lot of misogyny and fatphobia, and this time not just from the main character, but also from another prominent character, which I'm starting to side-eye the author more now that it's happened twice, Definitely a little off-putting. And this one, again, had very inconsistent characterization of multiple characters and things that were thrown out just to be a twist and to be shocking without really having the development that a well-structured thriller should have, in my personal opinion, to make a twist both shocking but also satisfying and giving the reader a chance to pick up on the hints ahead of time. So many of the things in this book were not remotely hinted to ahead of time. They were just thrown in when they were thrown in, and there were no breadcrumbs. So for me, this one was even worse than the first one. It was still easy to get through and, a popcorn thriller. It's the kind of thriller where you turn your brain off, you read it in an evening, you're mildly entertained. And that's it, which is fine. But again, very repetitive, clunky writing, weird phrases used over and over again. There's this phrase that the author loves, footsteps on a staircase sounding like gunshots, which is not only something I've never heard before, but also makes no sense whatsoever to me, because how in the world could anyone's footsteps sound like gunshots? Even if they are stomping their feet in heels, even in tap shoes, which are loud as heck. It makes no sense. Yeah, just, it wasn't, I don't think this is the pinnacle of the thriller genre, and I imagine that several of the nominees would have been more deserving of this win. I haven't read any of them, so I can't say from firsthand experience. A couple of them are on my TBR, and I just imagine that if they'd even been through a single round of editing, they would have been more polished than this book. So that's The Housemaid's Secret. I give it 1 star. I was entertained, I guess, but there were many aspects of it that I did not enjoy and thought could have been vastly improved upon. Okay, we're getting near the end. We're at the second last category, which is historical fiction. And I did already talk about Wayward, which won in this category, as well as debut fiction. So I'm not going to talk about it again. I gave it 3 stars. I haven't read any of the other nominees, but a couple of them are on my TBR and are books that I'm planning on reading soon. So we'll see. So that brings us to the final category, which is fiction. This is adult general fiction. And the winner was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And this is the second book I've read by R.F. Kuang. I read Babel. I was one of the minority, I guess, who were not totally blown away by Babel. I liked it a lot. I thought there were a lot of aspects of it that were fantastic. I gave it 3 stars. I really enjoyed it. But I had critiques. There were things about it that I think could have been developed a little better. There were aspects of the writing style that didn't quite click for me. So it wasn't, a favorite of all time. Reading Yellowface was really interesting because not only is there a very prominent character that is clearly based on R.F. Kuang herself, but a lot of the critiques of R.F. Kuang's writing in the real world are included in the novel as critiques of this character's writing. And some of those critiques are basically exactly things that I said about Babel. Not that I think that R.F. Kuang ever watched any of my reviews. I imagine she never did. But it was just a little bit meta to read a book where I can see my own critiques of an author's work within a book that I'm reading. It was a little weird. And honestly, that was something I found a little bit off-putting about the book in general. It was a little strange to me how obvious it was that this character was based on R.F. Kuang herself and how the character was described as being so gorgeous and successful and wealthy and everyone was jealous of her. She was so amazing and incredible. And all the critiques of her were, unfounded and just hate. It was a little weird. I'm not gonna lie. Back yourself. I totally support people having self-confidence, but I do think it is a little weird to write a book with a character based on yourself that is just amazing in every single way. And anytime anyone has something negative to say about them, it's pure hate and jealousy and nothing more. I did find it a little invalidating as someone who read Babel, going into it hoping to love it and really enjoying it, but having some what I thought were fair, well thought out critiques, and then to have those critiques sort of parroted back at me and framed as simply hate, it just feels a little bit invalidating. An author writes a book, puts a huge amount of effort into something, and puts it out in the world. And I can't imagine how hard it must be to have people reacting to your work and critiquing it and maybe misunderstanding it, seeing people not enjoy your work, seeing people possibly even bash your work, but framing every single critique as hate and nothing more just feels like it invalidates this whole side of the equation, which is readers who spend a lot of hard-earned money, their time to read the books that authors write, to engage with them, to review them and promote them, and to think deeply about them, to engage with them, and to have critiques, to care enough about a book, to discuss things that could have been handled in a different way, and to have all of that time and effort dismissed. The book itself was good. I thought the plot was interesting. It was pretty well paced. The main character was unlikable, but in a compelling way. Generally, I thought the premise was interesting. I just thought how meta it was, how much it was based on the author's real life, and how dismissive it was of fair critique on the side of reviewers and readers. Just a little weird to read. I think this book would have been more enjoyable for me personally if the character of Athena had been a little bit more complex and explored a little bit more deeply. I suppose that the fact that this character was so heavily based on the author maybe made it difficult for the author to look at the character through an objective lens and to give us that complexity and depth of character development that I would have wanted. I also didn't love the ending. I thought it was going in a different direction than it did, and it was very stressful to read, but I don't really feel like it had the payoff we are hoping for. The main character is so terrible. We want her to have her comeuppance, and I don't want to spoil it, but you only kind of get what you want out of that. I didn't find it particularly satisfying personally. So for me, this book was just okay. It was fine. I gave it 3 stars. I suppose R.F. Kuang might view my critiques of this book, as well as others, as simply hatred, but I don't know what can be done about that. I know that I'm making my critiques in good faith and trying to be thoughtful and fair, but you can't control how people receive the criticism. Definitely an interesting book. I think it's unique, and I think it did some things really well, and I was engaged and interested in it. Looking at the other nominees, I have a couple of them on my TBR, but the only other one that I have actually read is The Collected Regrets of Clover by Nikki Brommer. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It's much simpler in its scope. It's not trying to do as much, but I think what it's trying to do, which is exploring grief, it does very well. I was very moved by this book, more than I expected to be. And I found the characters very endearing and loved them a lot. So personally for me, that was my vote for the general fiction category. And I think that, in my personal opinion, it deserved to win just from the 2 that I've read, just because I personally liked it better than the winner. But again, I would love to hear your thoughts if you read any of these winners, if you've read the nominees. Which books did you vote for in the different categories? Do you agree with me on these books? Do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts. Just please be respectful about it. I am so happy to hear the ways that people disagree with me, as long as you're being kind and respectful, because people have different opinions, but that doesn't mean we need to attack each other, you know? If I hated a book you love, it is not me judging you or a commentary on you and your taste. Just like if you hated a book that I loved, it's not a commentary on me or my taste. So just be respectful to me, be respectful to each other in the comments, but I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the winners of the 2023 Goodreads Choice Awards. Be sure to check out some of the videos I mentioned, including my reading many of the horror nominees video, as well as my Fourth Wing reading vlog if you want that whole saga. This was quite the undertaking. I feel like I've been reading winners of the Goodreads Choice Awards since before 2024 began, and I guess that is accurate. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on the winners. As per usual, I feel like the books that tend to win the Goodreads Choice Awards are not the shining beacons of literature that I would hope for them to be. The Goodreads Choice Awards tends to be a popularity contest, and I'm not even sure that a lot of the people who vote have read the books they vote for, but it is what it is. Every time I do this challenge, I read several books that I would love to scrub from my memory, but I also always read at least one book that I wouldn't have read otherwise that I ended up really enjoying, and this year is no different. So I'll probably keep doing it, even as it chips away at my soul. So I hope you enjoyed this one. It is getting really late. I am super hungry, and my cats also are getting hungry, as they're demonstrating by knocking things off shelves upstairs. I hear the crashes and the bangs. So I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching this video. Thank you again to Parade for sponsoring this video and for making such ridiculously comfortable and cute underwear and bras and loungewear. I live in my Parade pieces, and I know you'll love them too. So use my code BRIDE40 and the link in my description box to get 40% off Parade's website, excluding sale items and the Betsy Johnson limited edition collection. I love Parade, and I'm so excited to be partnering with them on this video. So be sure to support me and them by using my discount code and my link. And with that, I'm gonna wrap up this video. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you to my patrons for your support. Y'all really are the best. If you at home want to join us on Patreon, especially in our book club, feel free. We would love to have you. The link is in the description box. Leave some sort of bookish emoji in the comments so I know you made it all the way to the end and you're a real one. Thank you for being a real one. I really appreciate you. Like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.